we are absolutely fortunate to have with us Dr. Robert Saul, or Bob, as he likes to be called. Bob Saul was born in Chicago and then moved to Colorado, where he graduated college and then medical school. He completed pediatric training at Duke University Medical Center, and then genetic training right here in Greenwood at the Greenwood Genetics Center. Most recently, you were or are, I'm not sure about your current retirement status, sir, the professor of pediatrics at Prisma Health and upstate at the University of South Carolina School of Medicine up in Greenville. Is that your still current status, or are you retired from that?
I'm professor emeritus at U of SC School of Medicine Greenville, and retired professor of pediatrics at Prisma Health Upstate Children's Hospital.
Well, congratulations on reaching the retirement age. It's something I look forward to and wish it was next week. But you spent 40 plus years in medicine after medical school. Is that correct?
Yeah, finished medical school in 1976, did a 3-year pediatric residency at Duke, and then moved to Greenwood in 1979. Was at the Greenwood Genetics Center in several roles and in pediatric roles until 2013, when I moved up to, we did not physically move, we stayed in Greenwood, but when I took a job at what was then Greenville Health System, but now Prisma Health, as the medical director of general pediatrics, and then slowly slid out doing work in a complex healthcare clinic.
Now, 1979, how did you know where Greenwood was on the map to even find your way down here?
Well, I was actually wanted to be, during my pediatric training, I wanted to be both a pediatrician and a specialist. And I couldn't figure out what that specialist was, though, as things evolved in college and in medical school. My first wife and I were foster parents for children with disabilities. Genetics was sort of what caught my interest. And as I looked around, a good friend in Chapel Hill said, "Have you thought about the Greenwood Genetics Center?" And I said, "Well, I have no idea where Greenwood is, but sure, I'll make a trip." And so the Greenwood Genetics Center had just been founded in 1975 by Dr. Stevenson. So I came, and it looked like a great place to train, looked like a great place to learn about genetics in the very nascent stage of genetics in the 1979. And then also just seemed like a great place to do general pediatrics. So did a combination of those two for 34 years until moving on to the next adventure toward the end of my career.
I didn't realize that the Genetics Center in Greenwood went back that far.
Yes.
That's interesting. Now, I came to know you through your writings and primarily through your guest columns in the Index Journal. And is it correct that you have published over 200 letters and guest columns in the paper going back decades?
Well, the last time I actually formally counted was in the early part of the last decade, and I had over about 165. So I've probably had, that's probably a good guess, close to 200.
Now, personally, your words in the paper are, how would I put it, extraordinarily refreshing. They're powerful without being inflammatory. And your columns are ones that I tend to reread even after I pass it through one time. And that's rare for something you read in the paper. If I understand it, your first published book was a collection of a set of your articles in the Index Journal. Is that right?
That is correct. Yes, my children's children, Raising Young Citizens in the Age of Columbine, which was published in 2013, was a combination of those essays, but was put into form that hopefully isn't just a recapitulation, is a compilation that takes it to the next level, which is indeed what my intent was.
Now, it's a kind of a sad subtitle that you had, Raising Young Citizens in the Age of Columbine. Do you feel somewhat that we're still in that age?
Well, let me back up for a minute. In the mid 1990s, I went to a meeting and heard somebody say that for anything that happens in your community, you should think of 12 words. I am the problem. I am the solution. I am the resource. So it took me a long time to sort of internalize that and convert that into action. But in the mid-90s, then I got involved with a variety of different projects in Greenwood. A wellness celebration, ended up getting with the Chamber of Commerce, became the president of the Chamber of Commerce for a year. And then Columbine hit. Kids killing kids made no sense. I asked myself the question, could that happen in Greenwood? And the answer, unfortunately, was yes. Then I asked myself the question, what had I done to make a difference to make sure that wouldn't happen? And the other answer to that was, I haven't done enough. So then I started writing these series of articles about what I considered to be the 5 steps to community improvement. So the subtitle to the book, Raising Young Citizens in the Age of Columbine, is sort of because my journey started after Columbine. But in some ways, I think we're still in that age, because so many of the children that are coming, so many of the young adults that are coming of age now, that was what was very much in the forefront in their childhood.
Right. Those 5 steps you referred to, they are learn to be the best parent you can be, get involved, stay involved, love for others, and probably the most interesting one for me was the last one, forgiveness. What brought you to include that as one of the main 5 steps?
Well, again, as I started writing these articles, I hadn't written a letter to the editor, except when I was in college, about the Vietnam War. I hadn't written a letter to the editor ever. And so I just sat down and said, well, what are the 5 steps that I think make a difference? And so parenting is obviously something, learning, but you have to learn to be the best parent you could be. And everyone has different abilities in that. Getting involved is important. Staying involved is a separate step. It's easy sometimes to get involved, tougher to stay involved. Love for others seems intuitive, but you're right, forgiveness, how does that fit in? Well, as I read more and more, I realized, and this is for me, it's been sort of that it is an ongoing journey, forgiveness. To me, that's personal forgiveness, communal forgiveness is the only way we as a community can move forward. I love, and if you haven't read it, it's a great little read, Tuesdays with Maury by Mitch Albom. Maury Schwartz was a professor at Brandeis where he went to college, and he found out he was dying from ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. He contacted him, and so they got together every Tuesday before Maury passed away. Mitch Albom was a very successful reporter for the Detroit Free Press, but I found he had sort of lost his moral compass and lost his way. And one of the things that Maury talked about in that book was for anything that goes wrong, forgive yourself first, forgive others, and do it now. That really hit home to me, that if I want to really make a difference in terms of something that went wrong, I need to forgive myself for some of the harsh things that I might be harboring. Doesn't mean I need to forget it, but I just need to, if I'm going to move on, I need to forgive myself. I need to forgive others, and I need to do it now. The classic example in the book is he and a friend, Maury Schwartz and a friend, got into a real tiff at one point. The friend died, and so when the friend passed away, they had not resolved this conflict. And so that's where we need to get to. Now, forgiveness, to my mind, is a real journey. I mean, the kind of forgiveness when your 5-year-old steals the ice cream cone from your 3-year-old, or vice versa, and you look at the child and say, tell him you're sorry. I mean, that's a very primitive, almost a primeval forgiveness in my mind. But then as you start to learn about forgiveness when you're 20, when you're 40, when you're 60, and even at my advanced age, if you're not evolving in your understanding of forgiveness and your willingness to extend forgiveness, you're not advancing as an adult, in my mind.
Right. That's a powerful concept. I can't say that I've touched anywhere near the approximately 200 articles that you've written, but in the past few years, I'll say that the one column that you did write that stuck with me was one that was published, I believe, around September of last year at the end of a summer of social justice awareness rising from the murder of George Floyd and others at the hands of those entrusted with power. It was a column you titled "Wasn't Me," and it had a really interesting take on things. In that essay, you touched on two topics of extraordinary sensitivity to the South, and especially to African Americans in the South, and that was the Confederate flag and voter suppression. Now, just bringing up those two topics alone and taking the position that you took, which we'll talk about in a second, that could be considered an act of bravery around here. Did you receive any negative consequences or feedback or have any worries about bringing up those subjects in this area?
Yes, but I mean, I must admit, when I wrote the article, I actually wrote the article when I was waiting in a medical waiting room for a procedure my wife was having. So this is an idea that had come a long time. And as I was writing, I said, what are the examples I'm going to choose when I say it wasn't me, and how we need to move forward as a community, how we need to move forward as a society. Those seem to be the examples that I needed to do. I needed to be willing to be uncomfortable. You're right. You always worry, especially in today's divisiveness, especially in the current climate, if anything's unpopular in terms of what that might rain havoc down on you. But people of conscience need to speak out and be a part of the process. I can't just sit on the sidelines. As a physician, I have to be as apolitical as I can. But I have to use people use the term bully pulpit. I don't like that term. But I have to use my pulpit of hopefully trustworthiness, gray-headedness, experience, and speak what I think is the truth.
Now, the truth that you brought up in this, and I'm not going to paraphrase, I'm going to use your exact words because I thought it was perfectly written. You wrote, quote, "I would argue that sometimes we might be innocent and clearly state wasn't me and still have some responsibility. I think that we all bear some responsibility to right past wrongs going forward." In your mind, what's something that, a very concrete action that we can take to right some past wrongs, whether it be the Confederate flag or voting suppression or other examples of historical injustices?
Well, I mean, I think back in one of the very classic ones that happened in Greenwood, but it's not it's sort of related to those, is the monument downtown, the war monument downtown. The activity to take the two plaques that said colored and white and say, no, we need to make a stand and change this. So the people that did that, I think of the mayor at the time and other folks are part of his community, just part of the community that just said, we just need to do this. So I think when it comes to voter suppression, we need to step out and try to do everything we can to right those wrongs and get people out there and just not accept the fact that that people should not have the vote. I mean, I think back, when I was in the 60s, I mean, I was in my mid-teens during the civil rights era when people went down to Mississippi to try to allow people to register to vote, and people were killed. Mm-hmm. Now, I must admit, I wasn't willing to go down there and be one of those people. I'll be honest on that one, for fear of what would happen to me. But I think we need to continue to speak out and bring those truths to power and do what we can. And with the Confederate flag, it's obvious that flag is a symbol of the Confederacy. And what was the Confederacy? Was a movement to sustain slavery. You can argue to the contrary, but you can't argue to the contrary in a truthful way.
Yeah, absolutely. You wrote another recent essay, and it actually looks like it might have been somewhat recycled from a few years back under its new title, What Really Matters.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, you listed 6 items and then went into detail on each on items that mattered. And it was truth, trust, science, civility, diversity, and faith. So the first question I have is that you originally published that in 2018 and then again very recently. Did you update it in any way, or was it just a formatting change? Did you have to rewrite anything for modern times?
Well, the first was written, I mean, it's interesting, in 2018 when I wrote it, it was just after hearing John Kerry the day before talk about his new book, Every Day is Extra. And I heard it at a book fair. And it just dawned on me what we at this point, we were 2 years into the last presidency, and where were we in terms of what was going wrong in my mind? Where have we lost our moral compass? Very interesting. Just before John Kerry had talked, I heard Sean Spicer talk about his new book. So the dichotomy was striking. So as I tried to say, okay, what really matters? And then those 6 things. And just recently, I actually have decided to sort of make this my next writing project.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have a scoop here, I believe.
Well, we'll see it. We'll see if it comes to fruition, but it's what I want to, because I really think, everyone could come up with what they think really matters. I think these 6 things try to encompass in many ways most of the things, but are very pointed in terms of some of the things that need to happen.
Did you intend? It was just
that I wanted to bring it forward again. So very little change, a few changes here and there, but you caught me. But I did not. If I plagiarized anybody, it's myself.
I tell you what, I like the newer formatting anyway, the new layout. I think you updated it for the better, even if all the words are mostly the same. Did you intend any meaning by the sequence with which you put those 6 concepts with truth on top and so on down the line, or really you didn't have any intentional meaning there?
I don't mean to weight them. And so it's not 1 through 6. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And that's something I'll be working on in my writing. But the first, obviously, the current status of truth was under assault, and so I felt like, how can we let that happen? And then I said, well, what is trust? But trust is extended to those people that tell the truth. And I'd like to think that people have trust in me as a physician, and will trust my words, because I'm telling the truth as best I know it when it comes to rendering medical advice. Science, being a physician, was critical to me, and the last 4 years have been an assault on science, and so I was quite upset with that. Civility, obviously, there's been a total lack of civility that has continued, so I think it's incumbent upon all of us to continue to be that. And even though at times when I'm watching TV and blurt out something that I recognize to be uncivil from my own lips, I need to sort of be careful with that. Diversity is this broad encompassing term about equality and equity and inclusion, and in what we can do to make a difference going forward with Black Lives Matter and everything. But diversity isn't just race or ethnic based either. And then faith. Everyone has different faiths. Some people have no faith. But I think if faith is practiced with integrity, whether one be Muslim, Jewish, Protestant, everyone, if the faith is a great moral compass.
Now, it's not often that you see faith and science coexist in the same list, and there are entire books devoted to that subject. What's your view on how faith and science can live and even complement each other?
Oh, Francis Collins, who's the head of the National Institutes of Health, has written a great book on faith and science. He was head of the Human Genome Project for a while. He was one of the people that identified the gene for cystic fibrosis, and he's a man of great faith. They are not antithetical at all. They live in the same universe, and you can see the great mysteries of life and understand them in scientific ways and understand them in spiritual ways at the same time, I think.
I would like to conclude by talking about your most recent book. Now, it's been almost a year since it was published. In fact, I was on my way or had marked on my calendar to attend your book signing here in Greenwood. And then that's when all COVID broke loose. And I don't know that it was actually ever held.
It was not.
Right. So I did acquire the book. I got it digitally, so I hope that doesn't offend. It's actually the way I prefer to read is on my Kindle. But the book is called Conscious Parenting Using the Parental Awareness Threshold. And the very first thing I noted when I opened it was a blurb of praise from former South Carolina governor and National Secretary of Education under Bill Clinton, Richard Riley. Did you know Governor Riley personally?
Yes, I do. Through my son went to Furman, and Governor Riley went to Furman, and there's the Riley Institute up at Furman, and I'm a graduate of the Diversity Leadership Initiative up at Furman and the Riley Institute. So I've had the occasion to know him, and he wrote an endorsement for that book and my first book.
Oh, well, that's neat. Your book describes a technique using something called the parental awareness threshold. And I can't see that without also thinking pain awareness threshold for some reason. And maybe the two are overlapped in my mind somewhat. You called it the PAT. Can you expand a little bit on what that methodology entails? And I know you took a whole book to describe it, so I know you can't do it a good service here in just a few minutes.
Well, let me go back. When I took the job up in Greenville in 2013, part of their leadership training was what was called conscious leadership. And part of the conscious leadership was being aware of where your thoughts and processes are. And you could think about a line. And when you're open, willing, and able to listen and think about change, you were above the line. When you were closed and when you were defensive, when you were right, you were below the line. And it's perfectly human to be on both sides. I mean, you might be in that 4 o'clock meeting and just be looking at your watch and say, okay, when's this thing over? And you're below the line. And so long as you're conscious about it, that's fine, because what you can then think about doing is say, okay, what can I do to be more engaged here? And you might say, nothing, I just want this meeting to be over, just as long as you're conscious of it. But the purpose is to try to then raise your level of consciousness so you can then make a change, so you can listen, be more aware, be more in tune with what is happening. It dawned on me as I was going through this and with my finishing up my career in pediatrics, this is sort of what I think parents should be doing. Thinking about the conscious awareness of a parental awareness threshold. There are times when you're going to be, I'm the parent, I'm right, you're wrong, do it, and that's just the way it is. I don't think that's a good posture the majority of the time. Running out on the street is not a good idea, okay? But just because you might be tired doesn't give you the license to yell at your child and tell you not to do something. So the point of being a conscious parent is sort of knowing where the child is in their development and knowing where you are. You might, this might be the end of the day and you're just whipped. You has had horrible meetings. Things aren't going well at work. And your child throws their pee, your 1-year-old throws their peas on the floor. Very innocent act, but that just might have been the straw for you. Trying to understand where you are in that conscious parenting paradigm is is important. I use
No.
an example. I use an example that I'll throw in, and you could. Mother picks up her child from school, goes by the drive-through, gets a drink, now says, "Be careful with this." 10 miles or a couple miles down the road, "Mom, my drink spilled." Man, you pull over, you yell, "I told you to be careful. What happened?" And it turns out that the book bag had shifted because of a turn Mom had made and knocked the drink over. So the point is, as you think about the conscious awareness threshold or parental awareness threshold, is for anything that happens, take that moment, hopefully more than a moment, but at least a moment, to pause. Then assess where things are, and then choose to make a decision about what you're going to do.
What you just did there, and it's actually quite eerie, you pulled that example up. I love throughout your book that you use these vignettes to demonstrate the point that you were trying to make in previous paragraphs. And that one that you just mentioned is on page 40. I know that because as I was reading some of these vignettes, you see, I have two grown children. I have a 25-year-old and a 21-year-old making their way in life now. And I thought I was a fantastic parent. You know, I thought maybe I should be writing some books alongside of you. I'll co-author one with you. And then I read these vignettes, and that one in particular, and it just made me cringe as I remember very specific times when I was just pure emotional reaction without any conscious awareness of who I was dealing with, what the fact that this was a 3-year-old. By the way, she spilled pink lemonade on top of my laptop in the back of a car, and how I reacted versus if I had just paused, took into consideration the whole situation, I would have behaved quite differently than I did on that day. And so I absolutely love those vignettes. You call them in real time throughout your book.
And the point of that is if you realize after the fact, I totally screwed that up. That's part of this assessment process, is trying to figure out what you can do better next time, making yourself more conscious.
That's why you need the forgiveness from that first book. You need to be able to forgive yourself for making these mistakes.
Right. And the whole point of the conscious parenting book and the first book is raising our children to be good citizens. That's what I think we've lost track of. Citizens take care of each other. Citizens have empathy for each other. And without being good citizens, it's just us against them.
That was an interesting twist in your book that I didn't expect. So what I was expecting were good parenting tips, but that really wasn't the point necessarily. You said, I'm going to quote this. You wrote, "I contend that the happiness of our children is a secondary goal, and that it's the delightful consequence of the primary goal, raising children to be good citizens via the principles of conscious parenting." So you put being citizens first, and then that leads to all of the benefits afterwards. And I thought that was an absolutely interesting take that you're not going to see in any other parenting book out there.
Well, some of that was based on some experiences. My parents divorced, and I remember my mother being an excellent single parent of 2 boys, but always just saying, "Bob, I just want you to be happy. I just want you to be happy." My first marriage ended in divorce, and I remember telling my now older son, "I just want you to be happy." And as I started to reflect on that, I said, is that really what I want? I think I want something, a more primary goal, being a good person, taking care of others, loving others, practicing forgiveness. Those then are the traits of being a good citizen. And if you're doing those things, I think happiness will come after that.
Now, you truly believe,
not a straight line.
Yeah, you truly believe that good parenting is a skill that can be taught and learned. Are you aware of or involved with the First Steps program here in Greenwood that has active parenting classes?
I was on the first board in 1999 when First Steps was established as a statewide program.
Okay.
By Governor Jim Hodges. So I was on that board until Governor Sanford was elected. And so I have not been active, but was very active initially in setting up the different programs in the 46 counties across the state.
Now, I thought it was interesting that towards the end of the book, you dedicated a section to do a deep dive into various age ranges, 0 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 5, 5 to 10, and then 10 to 20. So can we infer something about the way you broke out those ages, where it's clustered early on and then spread out later on in their lives?
Well, I mean, my bias is, in many, and this is my argument hyperbole here, that the book of life is written in the first 3 years and after that we add appendices. The whole point of being so much of the safe, stable, nurturing relationships we establish for our children are set and are so important early on in life. That downplays some of the later influences, but that I wanted to make sure that people understood the importance of those early interactions going forward. And yes, I sort of grouped the second decade of life, and I could have put a subset of that, but in many ways I think it's the same sort of thing. Preteens, teens are going through the same sort of angst, and parents also going through the same angst raising children.
Yes. Well, listen, to conclude, do you have any thoughts of wisdom or guidance that you could offer the Democrats here in the Greenwood County Democratic Party, or to anyone interested in the legislative process, I suppose, for enacting change for the better in our community, as well as for being better citizens?
Good question. And I think it's, obviously in many ways, the 5 steps to community improvement. Yourself being learning to be the best parent you can be, getting involved in what makes the most sense, staying involved, but that staying involved can be an evolution of how you stay involved. It might not just be the same role every time. Practicing love for others and understanding the role of forgiveness, and being willing to roll up your sleeves and make a difference. Everyone has their role, and so not everyone has to man the phones. Not everyone has to beat the street with the flyers. In some ways, I feel like my role is more of using my words in the paper, of trying to spread a message. But everyone I think needs to do their part. I'll go back in an interesting little vignette back in 2008 when Floyd Nicholson was running for state senate and Obama was running for president. My then 18-year-old son was very active and was I drove him around the streets of Greenwood so he could pass out flyers for Floyd Nicholson, and he was very excited to be a part of that process. And when I said, "You don't realize what power you wield, son, now that you can vote, because now that the Saul household has gone from 2 to 3, and that's big. That's big. And so we need to make sure everyone understands their role." I love the book of Stacey Abrams' newest book, "Our Time Is Now," I think is the title, where it spends a lot of time talking about voter suppression. I've heard Stacey talk, and she is just a force, and so I just love her. I love what Edith Childs has done with her voice in the newspaper. So I think we just need to continue to have our voice. It's in some ways it's not easy in our very conservative community, but I think we need to not poison the waters. We need to be as interactive as we can be.
Excellent words. I less argument and just more soul and positivity, I think, will win the day in the long run. Dr. Saul, thank you so very much for your time. This has been an incredible and informative session. Do you have any upcoming Index Journal columns that I should look out for?
Yes, I have one that but I'll have to submit it, and then it'll be in the queue. I just finished the book by Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha about the Flint water crisis. I think there's great generalizations there for what we have and for activity and for involvement. So that will be my next one that I will submit.
Look forward to it. Well, thank you
And
again.
That'll be on my blog too. So my blog on mychildrenschildren.com, I have those cataloged.
We'll make sure to share the link to your blog and our newsletters, etc. I think you've got a lot of good words there that many people will find very refreshing and reflect upon. Again, thank you very much, and I appreciate you joining us this morning.
Thank you so much. Take care.